Today my guest is Phil Japikse. Phil, I want to publicly apologize for mispronouncing your name 175 episodes ago.
That's all right. That's all right. That's why I go by Schematic. It makes it easier.
I haven't lived that down since.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Good to be back.
What have you been doing lately?
Doing a whole lot of speaking. A lot of talks on Agile. It's really kind of been a big push of mine to
It
get
is a passion of yours for that.
It is a passion of mine. Yeah, I run a nonprofit that runs Agile conferences as well. We've run 3 in Cincinnati, and we're planning one in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
It'll come in September, so it's become a big part of my life.
People are talking about Agile a lot. It's a buzzword, but I'm not convinced that people understand Agile. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that is fair. I don't know that Agile's become mainstream yet, but certainly it's not an edge case anymore.
Okay.
But a lot of people are using, we like to call it Scrum Butt, right? They're doing Scrum, but we cut this thing out.
Everybody's got a big butt.
or they're doing, mini waterfall, right? They're doing waterfall 2 weeks at a time type thing. So what we're trying to do with a lot of the talks that I've been giving and a partner of mine at Telerik, Joel Semeniuk, is really trying to get the word out there that Agile isn't just, all the misconceptions. A lot of people say, well, I don't have to write documentation anymore because we're Agile, or I don't have to do design because we're Agile, and they use it as a crux to take shortcuts. On the flip side, you also have a lot of people saying we won't adopt Agile because it means there's no design and no architecture. And
so these misconceptions not only are they're causing people to do things wrong, but also they're causing distrust of the whole methodology. I'm using words incorrectly here, I know, but
well, yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think the words are right. It's a matter of, anytime you have something good that gets misused. Right, then people start having these misbeliefs about it, and perception becomes reality.
Right, exactly. So what are some of those misconceptions?
Well, the biggest deal is that when people look at the Agile Manifesto and they see that we want, individuals.
Let's talk real quickly. The Agile Manifesto, define that.
So the Agile Manifesto was written. It's 10 years old now, and I believe 30-some thought leaders. Went to a ski resort out in Utah and sat around for a while and came up with just 3 paragraphs that says, basically how we should be doing software, how we can do things better, because we kind of suck as an industry. A lot of mistrust, a lot of overrun budgets, a lot of failed projects and things like that. And what's really neat about it is it's only 3 paragraphs, and the 3 paragraphs are very short. And Mark Twain has always said, he was quoted once as saying, I apologize for the length of this letter, I didn't have time to make it shorter. Right, and so they put a lot of time into it, made it very, very concise.
And that adds flexibility to it as well. That's why I kind of think that the word methodology isn't quite right.
Right.
Before, it's more of a framework or guidelines.
Well, it's almost more of a way of life,
right?
It's not how you do Agile; it's how you be Agile.
Mm-hmm.
I think is a good way of looking at it. But some of the parts of the manifesto are like individuals' interactions over processes and tools. So right there, you get a lot of people who are traditional project managers who live by Microsoft Project, saying we can't do Agile because you're telling me I can't have a tool, right? And working software over comprehensive documentation. Well, we're in healthcare or we're in Department of Defense, and we have to have documentation, so we can't do Agile because you just told me I don't have to do documentation. And the biggest point of it is, if you read the last sentence of the manifesto, it says, well, we value the things on the right, which are the things like processes and tools and contracts and working documentation.
It's X over Y or something like X.
We value the items on the left more, and the items on the left are collaboration and individuals' interactions and working software and responding to change. And so nowhere in the manifesto do they say you do not have to write documentation anymore. Nowhere does it says you do not have to have a process in place. And it certainly doesn't say you don't have to have a plan. Right? It just, you can't live and die by the plan because things are going to change. The housing market crapped out earlier this year, right? Or last year. And that changed a lot of business models. And if you couldn't respond to that change, your competitors did, you're out of business.
Right. Yeah, so I guess the key for every one of these points is that nothing is carved in stone. And just because they're emphasizing one thing over another, that doesn't mean that the other is unimportant.
Right.
It's a matter of relativity, this is more. We consider this more important than that.
Right.
Not that should be wiped out entirely.
Yeah, and the other key phrase, it's not in the manifesto, but I use it a lot in my talks, is last responsible moment. So, traditional waterfall, the way we did software is we would spend, maybe it's a 9-month project, we might spend 3 months writing documentation.
I've been there.
Right? Design document requirements, and then design and technical specification, and somewhere down the line we get to write some code. Well, meanwhile, your developers are sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting for this document to come, and then when they finally get it, it's a death march to get it done in time. Right? Well, you had 6 months, why aren't you done? And so what we're saying is things should be done at the last responsible moment. We're not saying that you can't have a design document. But there's no reason that 3 months before you write a line of code, you should be designing every single implementation detail of a form that you don't even know is going to exist. Right? When you get to that point where you're ready to tackle that item off of the product backlog, right? Because you put it in the sprint backlog, and that's the big requirements versus the requirements that we agree to do in this iteration, or 2 or 4 week time period. When you're ready to write it, that's when you can design it, right? And we're talking about micro design here. The big decisions like is this web or smart client, those obviously have to be made up front. So we're still doing some upfront design, but it's a last responsible moment. You can't wait till you write 3/4 of your program to say, oh, by the way, we're going to make it Silverlight now.
Right.
Right, when we started in WinForms,
right,
for example. Right, and the other thing that I really try and stress is that engineering practices haven't gone away. So we still need to have things like definition of done, right? Coding standards, testing, design reviews, code reviews, those types of things. Those are all very vital to software development. We've never said fly by the seat of your pants.
Yeah.
Right? The Agilists, the people who founded this movement, and I certainly came in late in the game. I've been doing Agile for about 5 years, so I'm certainly not on the forefront of it.
You're further ahead than most.
Well, but I'm very vocal, so.
And you're also louder than most.
Yeah, also louder than most. That's true. What I'm trying to get people to understand is that we still have all these engineering practices in play. And they just fit in a little differently, right? So instead of spending 3 months writing these design documents, we're going to write documents, if you have to have design documents, we're going to write them right before we write that actual piece of code. So instead of having a 400-page document that you write at the beginning, you might still end up with a significant document, hopefully not 400 pages for the sake of all involved, but you're not going to write it until you're ready to write the code.
I see.
And so you'll design it, you'll code it. Then you move on to the next piece, you design it and code it.
Sure.
And what this gives us the opportunity to do is to write accurate documentation, if you need to do it, because we are looking at what we're going to do tomorrow or today, as opposed to what we might do 6 months from now. And things are going to change and technology is going to change. Right? And if we try and design everything up front, we're going to fail.
I actually have an anecdote for that. I worked on a project years ago. My team was responsible for building an integration layer between an e-commerce application and all the back ends in a large retail company. All the back end systems. Dozens of back end systems. ERP systems, website search systems, inventory systems, accounting, so on. And the first thing they wanted us to do was to document the interface, the API of every single one of those systems. And that's what we did. We started at the first one and found the people responsible for it, and we spent months documenting. By the time we got done documenting it all, several of them had changed.
Yep.
We had to go back and revisit them. These things were changing under us as we were trying to document. And in retrospect, this is before I'd even heard the word Agile, at least in this context, I realized, we should have just taken one of those systems, documented it, and moved front to back, built that entire interface, and then moved on to the next one. And then that system would have been less likely to change because something was connected to it.
Well, not only that, less likely to change, but also when it changed, right? Because your system would break if you didn't have, things in play to handle that.
Yeah. Also, we would have delivered something beyond just documents, which my customers they value something they actually use. Documents are fine.
Well, that's one of the things I always ask in my talks when I talk about Agile. I ask how many people are professional documentation writers.
At that point in my life, I'm sure afraid I was.
And I've had, probably, and I've been on the speaker circuit for 4.5, 5 years now, right? I've had one person who actually their job was professional documentation writer, right? In all of my talks. I've had a lot of people raise their hands and say, that's not what we were hired for, but it seems like that's what we're doing, right? And at the end of the day, your customer's not paying you for a pile of documentation. They're paying you to write software to make their work more efficient, their jobs better, their lives better, whatever it is, right? We're getting paid to write software.
We're getting paid to solve business problems.
To solve business problems through software. Now, along those lines, you will probably have to produce some documentation along the way. Like I mentioned with Department of Defense and Healthcare, 2 areas where I've spent time, you have to have a significant amount of documentation involved. The problem that you run into when you do all this documentation up front is typically by the time you get to the end of the project, the documentation is wrong anyway.
Right. That was my problem.
Right? And so, yes, you have 400 pages of documentation. Everybody knows it doesn't mean anything. Right? And that's always the big joke. It's like, new guy's starting. Well, let's let him read the design documents. And after he spent a week waiting for his machine to come in, then we can actually give him the code and see what the system really does. Right? So when people don't have faith in the documentation, then it's meaningless anyway. A lot of times people are writing the documentation or the specifications or the diagrams so they get their check mark, right? Because they are expected to do it. They will get it done. It doesn't matter what the quality is or the content. They just have to do it, and then we throw it away. Not really throw it away. We put it in the change management system, which is about the same as throwing it away in some companies. And then you write the code. Right. And then if you have time at the end, you go back and get the documentation and you retroactively fix it to match the software that was written.
But I know what you mean. So we had these stage gates, we call them.
Yeah.
And then in order to pass this stage gate, you had to demonstrate that you had written these documents and check them into SharePoint or wherever it was.
Right.
Let me ask you this question. I know you really kind of immersed yourself in Agile, and when you were a consultant writing code full time, that's all you did.
Right.
Does waterfall still have a place in software development?
Well, I used to think so. It was interesting. I always said, well, NASA, is waterfall. Mm-hmm. And then one of the conferences that I ran, one of the Agile conferences, I went and researched it. And if you look at, I don't remember all the different names of the rockets, but if you look at NASA and how they went from no space program to putting a person on the moon, it was very iterative, right? They actually said, okay, first we have to make a rocket that can go so high.
Okay.
And then they did that. And now we need to make a rocket that goes a little higher. And now we're going to make a rocket that goes this high and has a living thing in it. Mm-hmm. And now we're going to try and orbit the Earth. And now we're going to put a person up in space. And so they were doing incremental development. They didn't go from zero to a design document to requirements to everything else to build a rocket to go to the moon.
Okay.
They actually did this very iterative development.
So it wasn't 2-week sprints; they were longer sprints.
Well, they were longer sprints.
The philosophy was similar to what Agile's manifesto.
And one of the things that we always try, one of the beautiful things about doing short sprints or shorter than typical, is you fail fast.
Right.
Right. When you have a failure, you can say, "All right, you know what? I've just learned something. I can't do this. Now I can go this way."
It only cost me a couple of weeks.
It only cost you a couple of weeks. In the case of NASA, when they had failures. It wasn't 5 astronauts that died trying to get to the moon because it completely misjudged gravity. It was, all right, this rocket didn't take off, and unfortunately there were some fatalities through the process. Right. But every time they had a failure, they learned from it, and they were able to put that into the next incremental unit of work. So, does waterfall have a place? I think there's a place where you have to have some pretty well-defined requirements. But you can have well-defined requirements and not do them all up front.
Okay, so even the most complex systems, they can learn something from Agile. They can adapt some of those practices, which I think is another, you didn't explicitly say this, but a key point a lot of people miss is, like any system, Agile doesn't have to be adopted full force all at once. That's my opinion.
There's a problem with me saying yes to that, because then we get into the whole Scrum butt, right? We're going to do Agile, but we're only going to do these pieces. And the problem is if you don't understand Agile, if you haven't been doing Agile, you don't know which pieces are the right pieces to take. One of the things I recommend for software companies, if they're going to start moving towards Agile, first of all, get an Agile coach. Okay. Right, somebody who's got experience turning teams around and doing that, because you need somebody with that experience. You can't just read a book, take a 2-day certification class, and expect to be able to completely change the direction of your company. The problem that I run into when I was still doing Agile coaching and still being a consultant was we'd have these companies that said, well, we've read this book or that book, or we went to this class, and we're going to do this and this, but we're not going to do stand-ups, and we're not going to do retrospectives, but we are going to do everything in 2-week periods of time.
Okay.
And, if you evolve to that and you find out that's the best way for your company to work, that's different than just from the get-go saying, we're really going to do waterfall 2 weeks at a time. Agile is supposed to be you learn, you adapt, and you adjust and you grow, right? But if you haven't tried these things, you don't know if they work or don't work.
So you think if a company really wants to become Agile, they really need to buy into it full force and jump into it with both feet. That's your opinion.
That's the preferred way to do it. It's hard to convince companies to do that sometimes.
Sure.
But if you do that, and you say, look, we're doing it this way, and we have a coach, somebody who can steer us in the right direction, right, and take those case-by-case instances that, you're flipping through the book going, well, the book doesn't cover this,
But there's a lot of flexibility in this.
But there is a lot of flexibility in the whole framework, right? And that's the whole idea, right? It's not, okay, you read the Scrum book, and that's how you're going to do it for the next 10 years.
Right.
No, right? You take that, you take XP, Kent Beck's book on extreme programming, which really covers the engineering side of things, whereas Scrum covers more of the project management, people management side of things. You take those together, it's like peanut butter and jelly, right? It's much better when you have them together. And you do that and you implement it, right? And we've had the best success by 100% implementing those ideas. And then, after a period of time, and it varies based on the customer and based on the people that you have, you can start adapting different techniques or adjusting the way things work, right? There's some core things that you should always do, stand-ups, sprint reviews, sprint retrospectives, those types of things I would say you always have to do because it's a transparency aspect that is just so important in Agile. But there's other things you can tweak, right? It's funny that I always say use 1, 2, or 4 week iterations, but not 3 week iterations.
Why's that?
Well, people don't think in threes. So if we have 6 months until we're going to deliver, and we're doing 3 week iterations, how many sprints is that?
Mm.
Yeah. If we're doing 6 months until we deliver, we're doing 2 week iterations, how many sprints is that?
12 or 13.
Yeah, 12 or 13, right? We think that way.
Okay.
Right? So it's just me, it's just Phil saying don't do 3 because people don't think that way.
Okay.
But you'll get into these religious debates where people say they should only do 1 week or they should only do 2 week and 4 week is downright evil, this type of other thing. And I always recommend start with something.
Yeah.
2 weeks is a nice middle of the road. Bigger enterprise customers, we started with 4 weeks.
Okay.
Because it's a bigger machine and it's harder to move, right? If you're a small, very, very experienced shop, you could do 1 week iterations. But if you're working for a big company, 1 week is very tough to get anything done in, right? Because you're going to spend so much time with red tape that you're not going to have any time to develop.
Yeah. I did. I have another anecdote. I worked with a customer one time who claimed they were doing Agile, they were doing Scrum. They had a sprint, but the sprint was 4 weeks long, and they had no rule against business users and customers calling the development team and adding things to the sprint in the middle of it. I said, well, that doesn't sound very Agile today. No. And I said, well, where is this list of items that you're going to do in each sprint? And it was only one person knew where I was. Only the manager knew where actually to find the list, which I also didn't think was very Agile.
Right.
So they had done what you suggested they don't do, is they read a couple of articles, and they adopted a couple of things that they wanted from it, and I think they were ready to abandon it.
Yeah.
Again, they wasn't working for them. It was crisis management seemed to work better for them than.
And that's one of the problems that we run into is you'll have companies that do that and say, well, Agile doesn't work.
Right.
Well, you weren't really doing Agile.
Right.
Right? You were piecemealing, adopting the things that you thought would make your life easier, right? As opposed to really adopting a methodology or a way of life that will make your life somewhat easier, right? So one thing I always try and stress as well is Agile's not a silver bullet. If you perfectly implement some sort of Agile methodology, again, whether it's Scrum or Kanban or any of the flavors, all your problems aren't going to magically go away, right? It's not going to be all roses and unicorns. But what you get at is a transparency that will expose those problems quicker so you can fix them.
Yeah.
Right? We all know that person, and hopefully we all know somebody else other than us, who just skates by and doesn't really do any work, right? And big waterfall projects, when you have 9 month
it's easy to hide
development cycles, it's very easy to hide, right? In Agile, when you're standing up every day and you say, I worked on this feature yesterday, I'm going to be working on the same feature again today, and nothing's holding me back, and they do that exact same mantra for 2 weeks in a row, and somebody says, what was the estimate on that feature they're working on? And they come back and say 8 hours, right? There's no real hiding.
Right.
Has Agile solved that productivity issue?
No, I just pointed it out.
No, it just exposed
so
it,
somebody
right?
else can solve it.
Yeah, so those technical issues become HR issues, and then they're very easy to solve.
Right. All right. Real quickly, resources people can look for if they want to become more agile.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good books out there. Ken Schwaber obviously has a whole bunch of stuff on the Scrum side of things. Kent Beck, who wrote XP and has a lot of stuff on test-driven development and more on the engineering practice side of it. I believe Schwaber's latest book is on MS Press, but I don't remember the exact title of it. There's also, you can follow Joel Semeniuk's blog. He's Joel from Canada. Mm-hmm. But really the best thing is find a local user group, a local Agile user group, right? Because you need to talk to people who have done it, who have been through that transition, who have suffered the pain of making that transition and now enjoying the happier life, right? Because change is hard, right? I'll tell you right now, you can't just walk into your company tomorrow and say, guys, I saw this great show called Technology and Friends, and Phil said we're doing it wrong, so stop what you're doing. We can completely change how we do things. Right? That really doesn't work.
This is not a life-changing episode.
Yeah, no, you're going to get booted right out of that office, right? Unless, of course, you're the owner, then you're going to have a revolt. But look at incremental change, and really the best way you can do the incremental change, and this is actually kind of people saying, well, wait a minute. Phil just said take all of Agile and adopt it, but do it incrementally. You can, and what I mean by that is pick a particular project, right? Not the entire organization.
Right.
Take a project. You get 6 or 8 your top developers who are adapt, or can adapt to change well, and have them do the Agile project with an Agile coach or with some ties into a local Agile group. In Cincinnati, we have the Cincinnati Agile Roundtable, right? So there's Agile user groups all over the country. I know there's Agile Philly. Boston has an Agile group as well. Those are the cities I just know off the top of my head. I don't know if there's something up by you in Southfield or not.
I'm not aware of an Agile group. We have a lot of technical groups.
Yeah. So, but if you find a group that has that experience, then use them as a sounding board. And you might even be able to find a consultant who can come in and be a coach for you.
Right.
Right, so that's really, I mean, reading books is fine, and reading blogs is fine, but you need somebody who's got the experience who can say, oh, well, in your particular case, here's what I would do, as opposed to the books which are very generic.
Okay. Tell me about Schematic. Where do we find you online?
Where do you find me online? Well, Schematic is SKI, as in snow ski, and medic as in paramedic. That's my Twitter handle. It's also my blog, schematic.com. So if you go to Schematic on Twitter, you can actually get to my blog from there. You can send me an email from my blog. The reason I do Schematic is nobody can say or pronounce Japikse, as you've proven on occasion.
I'm not the only one.
You're not the only one. No, it's happened before. But that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
And then if you just wait around, eventually you're going to make your way to everybody's hometown.
Yeah.
Because you're traveling and speaking a lot.
I'm speaking a lot. Last year I gave 66 talks. I'm on track to probably give about the same number this year.
Impressive.
Yeah.
Phil, thanks a lot.
Well, thanks for having me on, Dave. It's always a pleasure. So So the tagline that we have to talk about is technology and friends. And really, honestly, without my involvement in technology, I would have a very, very different set of friends. I've been speaking for a long time, and the technology has brought me some of the best friendships I've had in my life.